I'll just make it clear so everybody knows Ed isn't becoming a Jew. It's cold out there. Hey. All right. Good morning, Ed. All right, we are in chapter 4 of First Peter, and last week we started with a verse that's it's an eye opener, or whatever you want to call it. It's important. It's the end of all things is near. Anybody want to refute that? Well, you say, well, I was written 2,000 years ago. Okay. I came across just a paragraph that I thought, well, this was good. So I'll just read it. The nearness of eternity. And that's something for us to always consider, because our eternity is near, no matter who we are. The end of all things is at hand. Nothing abides around you. Like the stream which wanders through the valley, everything is flowing by. A single year is often sufficient to change the whole complexion of life. The Christian contemplates, if with awe, yet in peace, the breaking up of all human schemes and societies and pleasures and gains and losses. He anticipates the wreck, but he feels himself to be in the ark. So, the nearness of it. All right, we are actually in verse 13 of this 4th chapter. And I've come to really appreciate the book of 1 Peter this time through. It just seems like there's so much there that is so applicable to us, and it's just right there where we live and what we deal with, and ways to improve or cope as you wish. Verse 12, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. Peter has not only Peter, I'll just say the New Testament deals with trials. We're told that trials, troubles, tribulations, testings, sufferings, ordeals, they come upon us, but invariably they have a purpose. And also it tells us that we're to rejoice or exult in them, or count it all joy. I think it's just always included with these things that we would normally take as I don't like it, I don't want it, is this necessary? Or the time-honored phrase, why me? Remember Job? I'm reading through Job, my wife and I, and old Job. He started out with a whole lot of trouble. Then he got some friends who heaped trouble on him. They kept telling him, well, obviously you're the world's worst that ever happened or could happen, and why don't you just own up to it? So Job was tried, wouldn't you say? Suffered badly. Why? Well, if you read the very end of Job, Job passed the test. And look what he got. He got, what was it, double of everything that he started with except wife? Double. So it's like God is saying, all right, you had a test, you passed it, so you're rewarded for it. Suffering. He talks about suffering here in verse 13. I told you before, there's something like 13, 14 times in the book of 1 Peter that this word is used. and suffering is for a test. If you suffer, well, to the degree, in this case, to the degree that you suffer. Are some sufferings worse than others? Yeah, I heard some sense quickly out there. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are some sufferings that are really, I mean, they're just miserable. And others are an inconvenience. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing. The sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of His glory you may rejoice with exultation. So, to the degree that you're put to the test, the suffering, you're going to be rewarded. Pass the test. Oh yeah, how good it'll be. How very good. And the words that he uses are superlative. They're top notch. So that at the revelation of His glory, you may rejoice with exultation. Different people rejoice differently. You'll see some people go crazy. I mean, like, oh, cool it, guy, you're going to have a stroke. You'll see that at athletic events.
Yeah.
People get real excited at athletic events. So it's pretty wild. They call them fans, which is just short for fanatic. In the attic, they're fans. All right. So, but they can rejoice, and they really express it. Others rejoice, and they say, "Oh, that's really nice." And you've got it. That's it. Inside, both are the same. Some people just aren't that outwardly expressive. This one is exultation. I mean, rejoice just so much. And different things cause us to rejoice. Like I used the example of an athletic event. Some people get real excited and rejoice. I mean, they really do, because their doctor said you're in good health. And that's cause for really, boy, I'm glad to know. Jeff.
Well, looking at it, it says, to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing. And so some people are going to suffer worse than others, but you're expected to keep on rejoicing. And it's like, in my mind, to think about that, and you know, God's allowing this for a reason. And the reason is to make you conform to the image of His Son. And so some people more than others, just to beat the worldliness out of you. But it's like God being faithful, and it's showing that He just loves you so much that He's going to do whatever it takes to get you there. So that's a reason to rejoice.
Bert.
Yeah, that's important. The thing is that I think is a real key here, because of the verse that we just stated too. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ. So why did Christ suffer? Because He was unjust, because He was unfair, because He was a sinner? No, because he was doing the will of God. And so it's important, you know, just because we're suffering doesn't mean that God's going to reward that if we're suffering because of our own sin, because of our own, you know, wrongdoing. And we will suffer the consequences of sin, but it's sharing in the sufferings of Christ, the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ. In other words, as you're being faithful, as you're persevering, sometimes suffering will happen. But you rejoice, because God is able to keep you steadfast. He's able to bring you through it. But he's not going to reward, you know, this is not saying he's going to reward any kind of suffering, you know, that you bring on yourself.
Yeah.
So it's a real key there to be faithful in
Yeah.
the suffering.
Yeah, he doesn't say that we have to suffer just as Christ suffered. He says it's a matter of degrees. And when Christ was suffering in the highest degree, he had just said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? That was the most he ever suffered. And right after that, he rejoiced with just a phrase, and it was the most rejoicing he ever did, which was, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. It's over. Oh, I did it. I did every last one of the things I was supposed to do. Now, as far as suffering is concerned, as much as Christ suffered, and so since we have degrees, we aren't going to out-suffer Christ. But we have all this, whatever comes to us, hey, he went there. He's been in that degree before. And so he made it possible for whatever comes to us, we have this reward. His reward was he sat down at the right hand of the Father on high. And with what he did, he's now our Savior. And he intercedes for us. That's his exaltation. And we have the same thing available to us. So when it comes, realize that, hey, this isn't the end. The end is out there, and it's so nice. It's so good, and we can look forward to that. So keep on rejoicing. Keep on rejoicing. Now, let me read the rest of the chapter and look at that more as a unit. If you are reviled, now this is part of this suffering business yet. If you're reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Make sure that none of you suffers as a murderer or a thief or evildoer or a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he is not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in this name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God, and if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome of those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? Therefore, those also who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. And he's going to go on in the next chapter with more suffering and talking about suffering, I should say, and trying to explain it to us. And Peter has written to people who obviously had suffered, and they're having to deal with it. But there's more coming. And so he's preparing them for it. Not only okay, you feel like this because of what's happened, and let me encourage you, but there's more coming, and let's get ready for it and be able to deal with it as it comes to us instead of letting it swallow us up. So, yeah, if you're reviled for the name of Christ, you're blessed because the Spirit of God, or Spirit of glory, that's the Holy Spirit, and of God rests on you. So you can do this. You've suffered this way, and you've suffered this much, and whoever you are, there it is, and you can do this because God is your helper. You're not alone. You're not abandoned. Terrible feeling if you felt like, man, I'm out here by myself and no one's helping me. And how am I going to deal with this? And when we feel like we have to deal with something alone, boy, that's tough. And so life requires someone, God, to help us. And here he says, this is it. Verse 14, there it is. The Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Now, because of that, make sure that none of you suffers as. And here's a list that's just, boy, he said, make sure that you're not suffering because you deserve it.
Right.
Murderer, thief, evildoer, troublesome meddler. Boy, is one worse than the other? A murderer? He puts that first, and of course the problem with being a murderer is you can't change it. You did it, that's it. You're there. Thief, well, give it back, quit doing it. Evildoer, same thing. And a troublesome meddler, busybody. Well, you know, MYOB, please. Yeah. Okay. So in this, there's the future glory that's coming, and how good that is. I put down some things here that I wanted to be sure to mention. All right, is it an honor to suffer? Depends, doesn't it? Well, he just said here, if any suffers as, and he gives this list of what, 4 things. If you suffer like this, that's not an honor to suffer like that. But if you suffer as a Christian, is that an honor? Is that a sought for honor? We don't usually do that. I'm going to do this so that I'll suffer and then be honored. You know, it's like lay your thumb out there and whang, you know. Oh boy, now I get some sympathy. Yeah, you go show it to your wife and she says, that was a stupid thing to do. She's right. Okay, let's go a different route here. Okay. So, if any suffers as a Christian, first of all, verse 15, if you suffer as a murderer, thief, evildoer, troublesome meddler. Now, verse 16, if anyone suffers as a Christian, if it happens, he's not to be ashamed, but is to glorify God in this name. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, there's a sign you could carry around. It says, I'm a Christian and I'm suffering because of it. How we handle things, how we portray ourselves, what motive, what attitude that we're showing is usually that makes the difference. was talking to Daniel, the ambulance guy back there, earlier this morning, and what they're having to go through now, Remsa, because of the flu epidemic. I didn't say flu season. It's flu epidemic. What are most of your ambulance calls, Daniel, right now? Flu calls, okay. All right. When, you know, sickness is pretty much, we're not talking about just an illness, but suppose you do something really, really good. You've helped somebody, and in the process you're injured. But you did it. You did what you did because it was the right thing to do. They needed your help, and so because of your Christian background, your Christian way, you did it, and you're hurt. Well, your attitude. It could be, you know, if you ruin it, you've said after you get hurt and so forth, you said, well, I rescued the dumb guy, but he sure didn't deserve it. Well, down you go in flames. But if instead you say, well, he was there, he needed my help, and sure, yeah, it's an auto accident or something, so you stopped and helped. Whatever. Maybe they did do something really dumb, but you don't. And so don't. Now, there are many different ways we can be hurt, wounded, injured. It can be socially. It can be financially. It can be morally. But we, as Christians, have to go about it properly here in verse 16. If anyone suffers as a Christian, he's not to be ashamed, but to glorify God in this name. You ever do something good and somebody thanks you or somehow praises you, and you say, well, thanks be to God.
Amen.
There you go. Thanks be to God. Yeah, well, give God thanks. Usually, that's where the thanks ought to be. In this morning's bulletin on the back of it, it talks about scientists coming up with some real good ideas, and then the very last of it says that scientists don't usually give credit to whom credit is due. It was God that came up with this idea, and read it. It's an interesting thing. Okay, any comments yet? Rodney.
I was going to say, the last example you gave, as a Christian, you help somebody because that is the right thing to do. But another way to look at it is it might be a way you can witness to them for Christ. You know, I did this because you have a soul, and God is interested in your soul. Okay? And then on the other people that suffer because of things they brought on themselves, they can be happy too, because they still have an opportunity to get right with God, and there's forgiveness there for them for the things that they have done.
Okay. All right. So there's oftentimes when a person is put to an extreme, then God has an opportunity through you if you're there and you're the one. So take advantage of it. Someone is hurting, and you step in to be an aid or help. Yeah. Okay. All right. We go to the next two verses. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. Some of the statements that Peter makes by inspiration are sobering statements. And as you read them, whoa. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? These questions suggest answers too awful for words. You know, the rhetorical question. All right. If afflictions, sufferings begin with Christians, what awful future awaits those who will not name the name of Christ? Will not. Must not in their mind do that. He doesn't exist. He isn't my Savior. I'll do it my way. Da 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 da. Then many things are said. What will happen if God's people barely make it? It's with difficulty. You know, you picture, squeezing through the door as it shuts. The standard must be here, and you sneak over. Whatever. If God had to do all that God had to do with His Son, Jesus Christ, to get us ready for heaven, what will happen to those who just don't do it? To those that are out playing this morning, have never given it a thought. And the world is so thoughtless when it comes to God these days. So very thoughtless. The modern man, he's technologically advanced. Maybe, but he's spiritually a wreck. Yeah. So many ways this could be said. He's talked about suffering. And then he talks about suffering as murderer, thief, evildoer, troublesome meddler. And then suffers as Christian. Not to be ashamed, he's glorified God in this name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. It's time. Revelation 2:10. Anybody know offhand what that says? Be thou faithful unto death, I'll give you a crown of life. No matter, you be faithful unto the point of death or to death, that's when you get the crown of life. If the righteous scarcely be saved, what about those who aren't faithful unto death? Gets a little hard, suffer a little bit, I'm out of here. I'm not going to put up with this. If that's the kind of God that you serve, I'm not going to serve Him. How can we even think that way? But it's the vast majority. Just ask Noah. With the 18th verse, And if it's with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? Now, suppose I put a historical spin on that. I prefer to believe it the way that I put it, as though it applied directly to us. But suppose we went back to the time of Peter and shortly thereafter, 70 A.D., a man named Cestius Gallus, a Roman general. He came against Jerusalem and surrounded it, shut it up. 70 A.D. Inside of Jerusalem, there were many Christians at that time. For no reason that can be determined, nothing's written about it, why this Cestius Gallus departed, took his troops and left. The Christians immediately got out of Jerusalem. They left, they went north to Syria, Pella in Syria, where Agrippa, though he wasn't particularly a charmer for Christians, still, when they came into his domain up there in Syria, he accepted the Christians and protected them. They were then safe. He was an ally of Rome, but yet they were okay up there. They barely got out of Jerusalem when Titus razed it to the ground. He killed above 1 million of its inhabitants. He put an end to civil order and ecclesiastical order. What are we saying? When Titus left Jerusalem, Jerusalem wasn't there. Its people weren't there. Only the healthiest, and there weren't many, were taken alive and sold as slaves. All right. That's history. Verse 18, and if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved. They got out. They barely made it out of Jerusalem. God opened a way for them, and out they went. Boom, it closed right behind them. And then it's, what will become of the godless man and sinner? Boy, what those people went through. Ooh. And the city. Look at the world. Look at it today. In any era, look at it. Those who are righteous, what happened to those in Jerusalem? So, these two verses, 17 and 18, they're timeless, and yet we learn from history their importance. Now, having looked at the suffering that he's talked about this morning, and if you suffer the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, but don't suffer in the wrong way for the wrong, because of your own wrongs. Suffer as a Christian, that's okay. And then, boy, if it's with difficulty, and where will the godless be? We get down to verse 19. Sum it all up. Therefore. those also who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. Boy, something in there tells me that Peter is underlining what he's just said. If anyone suffers according to the will of God, is it the will of God that we suffer? He just said it is. It is. Well, man, this business of being a Christian isn't a very good deal. When in reality, it's the best deal we'll ever get. And this deal goes on forever. A good deal. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and the Spirit of God rests on you. That's back in verse 14. That's a good deal, to be blessed of God, because you have help now and forever. That's a good deal. So we get down here, and we've had the opportunity to glorify God in verse 16. And then we're told, those also who suffer according to the will of God, that is, as a Christian, not as an evildoer, shall entrust their souls. You give, you trust. I was looking this morning, some of these little guys that are brought in here on the bus, the van. There was a little tiny girl sit right here on the corner. Just, I don't know, she's 4, maybe 3, 4. Some parent just sent her down here. Whew, to me, that's really trust. You let your children, your little vulnerable ones, out of your sight. You're entrusting someone with their care. And parents, you understand that that little one will grow up, and they'll get up to a marriageable age. And they're going to be entrusted with somebody else's care. You listening, Sarah? Oh, okay. Is he going to take good care of you? She's absolutely sure. She never said yes. So now he has a really responsible position. We're going through a flood of this right now, you know. Don't laugh too loud, Kenneth. This business of trust, though, your soul, is there anything that you have that is more valuable? Entrust your soul to a faithful Creator. How do you do that? The answer is right there in the verse. How do you do it? How do you entrust your soul to a faithful Creator?
Be committed.
by doing what's right. Is that what it said? Do what's right. Is that so hard? It is for some, because they never do it. Do what's right. So that when it's all over and done, it's through, Christ has come again, and it's judgment and all that, and okay, you've done what's right, and so you hear the words, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Jeff?
There's a scripture in Hebrews that says, even though he was a son, he learned obedience through the things that he suffered.
And God told him, when he said, it's finished, into thy hands I commend my spirit, God said, yeah, well done. Only with him is the good and faithful son. Yeah. Okay. So we have the privilege, on our part, and we take advantage of God's part, and all here. So our souls are entrusted to the faithful Creator in doing what's right. Okay, Lord willing, we'll start with chapter 5 next Lord's Day. Thank you so much.